Here's what I need. I'm going to go handpick somebody in the audience to help me out on stage, but while I'm doing that, I need everybody to be talking about one little subject as we get started today, because I think it'll help kind of fuel our mind for where we're going. So here's what I want you guys to process. Who is the toughest person that you know in your life, and why? So start talking about that. I'm going to go handpick somebody. And what makes them the toughest? Everybody, this is Dwayne. Everyone say hi to Dwayne. He joined our church 2-3 weeks ago, and he didn't realize what he was joining. Come on over, sit down. Everybody, he's going to need a little help from the crowd, so I need, on the count of 3, just a big roar of applause, and he's gonna bench press this stuff. I don't even know how much it weighs. It's probably 3,000 pounds. So, okay, so on the count of 3, give him a big roar and rising sun welcome. All right, 1, 2, 3. I don't think that's 3,000 pounds. Yeah. I don't think you're the toughest guy I know. I mean, that's pretty tough, don't get me wrong. All right, so let me hear it. Who's the toughest guy you know or toughest woman you know, and why? Let's go. Muhammad Ali. What made him tough for you? Yeah, he did. Yes, he did. Actually, if you Google toughest man in the world, he comes up as number 1, just so you know. Yep, anyone else? Your friend Mike, what makes Mike tough? Hold on, let me slow down. 1st Division Marines, fighting hand-to-hand, Vietnam, what else? Martial arts instructor, competition fighter all over the world. Yep, he'd probably make the list. Donna? Your aunt that turned 100. She lost a son in Vietnam, lost another son when she was 40, or when he was 40. Widowed 3 times, survived leukemia, and the list keeps going. What's your aunt's name? Mary. Wow. Whew. That's at the top of the charts. Anyone else? No one else wants to say anything. They're like, nope, doesn't compare. Yep, Sydney. Go ahead. Your dad? Yeah, that's good. My dad's tougher than your dad. That's what she's saying. And he is. You're right. Every dad should be the toughest dad, right? That's good. I love it, John. Anyone else? Who? Marshall Manners? Matters, yes. Eminem. That's fantastic. All right, that's good. Very good inspiration there. Anyone else? Okay, so you kind of get the idea on where we're going. This sermon series that we're launching, I'm just going to be up front with you. This was not in the original cue for the outline for the year. I did not prepare in January this sermon series to be hit in the end of May, the 1st of June. The reason we're talking about this sermon series called Tough as Nails is because of you, and it's for you. What I mean by that is, as I sense and as I pray about where God's leading our congregation, where God's leading some of you, I know the adversity some of you are in. I know the trials some of you are in. And man, it just seems like we need a sermon series. We need a good reminder that sometimes we're called to be tough as nails. And when I say tough as nails, some of you might have a different definition of that, but over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be walking through a character study of the guy by the name of Joshua, who really kind of epitomizes, I think, what toughness is all about. And I hope in the next 4 weeks that as we unpack this series, you're going to learn more definitions of what toughness is, that this might connect with you. You might approach a sermon series like what we're starting today, and you might go, you know what, I don't quite understand why we need that series. Then let me just remind you, sometimes you learn how to change a tire before you actually need to change a tire. Some of us need this series before we're actually going to enter the season that we're going to enter. You might not understand why this series has any relevance or application in your life, but eventually you will if you have not learned why it's relevant today. Some of you are going through the fire, some of you are going through adversity, and this is going to be like a good glass of ice water on a hot, scorching desert day. But that's why we're doing this series, Tough as Nails. And as I think about who are the toughest people in the world, who are the toughest people that I think of, certainly at the top of my list are people like my grandfather, my grandmother, and my dad, because, dads are always tougher than your dad, sort of thing. But as I get real objective, and as I think about who in our world has shown great adversity and great toughness, there are 3 or 4 people that really kind of pop at the top of the list for me. And the first guy that I'd like to mention is a guy by the name of Aron Ralston. Some of you might not know who Aron is, but Aron Ralston was climbing in the Blue Canyons of Utah. And he has written a book. It's a book about his experience. If you've not heard about it, it's actually a movie, too, called 127 Hours, I think is what the movie's called. But the book is entitled Between a Rock and a Hard Place. And as he was climbing, this happened in 2003, as he was climbing, a boulder falls down and traps his right arm, as you can see in the picture. And he had his video camera, and he had his phone, and he thought he was going to die. And it was about day 4, day 5, as he was dreaming about his death, and as he had already said goodbye to his mom and his dad and his fiancée at the time and all those that he loved, this epiphany happened and this dream happens, and it's actually his future self talking to his son. It's an amazing story if you've never heard it. And it's relatively old, so if you've not heard it, I'm giving you some spoiler alerts here. But he has this conversation with his future son, and in that conversation, it actually inspired him to do the unthinkable. And so he woke up with this idea: I could break my arm, and I could sever it with my pocket knife. And he describes that experience. So he starts out the process by breaking his radius and then his ulna, because he thought, well, that's going to be the harder part. And so once he broke the 2 bones, he heard this large pop. And this is after he had waited. This is after he's on the verge of death. His water's gone, his food's gone. And then he takes out his knife and he starts cutting his arm. And then after the process of cutting his arm, he thinks, wait a second, I probably need to tourniquet this thing. Yeah, probably. He wasn't in his sharpest position. And the knife was also very dull. And so he describes this experience, and he cuts everything except for, Joe, what was it his nerve? Yeah, it was his nerve. Joe and I read this chapter of his book because it was just so fascinating to me, going, how can a guy display this much, like, nerve, pun intended, right? And so he saves the nerve for the very end. And he says that when he touched the knife to the nerve, it recalibrated his idea of what pain was. This guy, incredible toughness when you just stop and think about the resolve that he had. There's another guy I'd like to introduce you to. You may have never heard of him. I'd never heard of him before, kind of studying examples of toughness. If you can move to the next slide. This guy's name is Mike Stroud. Mike Stroud is an extreme athlete. He's an extreme person. He is an expert. I don't know how he ever got this title, but he's an expert in human endurance in extreme environments. Let me say that again. He is an expert in human endurance in extreme environments. The guy did a 2,000K. Now, we're not English, so we have no concept what a 2,000K is. We might know what a 5K is. But a 2,000K is 1,242 0.74 miles. He did that all on foot in the Antarctica. You're like, what? True story. He decided to try to walk through the Antarctica in extreme conditions. He was faced with 46 degrees Celsius, 160 mile an hour, which is negative 160 Fahrenheit. He faced up to 100 mile an hour winds. And because he was a purist and he's an extremist, he decided not to do it with charcoal-enhanced clothing. He thought that was cheating. And if that weren't enough, he decided also to do a Marathon des Sables. I've never heard of that before either, so I had to look it up, and I decided to show you the promo. If you want to do the Marathon des Sables, it's happening this year. And here's a trailer for 2018. Of $99, I think we can enter a team. Basically, what it is five marathons long through the Sahara, which equates to about 131 miles. That's just a race. So good luck. The gun goes off. Have fun racing through that. I can't even think of one marathon, let alone 5. Then a close friend of Mike Stroud. Go ahead and go to the next guy. This guy's name is Ran Faines, and he actually did the Antarctica trip with Mike. And while he was there, he had severe frostbite in his left hand. And so when he got home, it was bothering him so much when he would hold his wife's hand or when he had touched the countertop that he was finally he was kind of irritable. So his wife said, "Would you just take care of your fingers already?" So he does what any normal human being would do. And he goes and buys a saw at Home Depot, no joke, and he cuts through the fingertips of all of his hand, of the left hand, just to take care of it because, that's what you do if you're an extreme athlete. So he said the hardest part was the thumb because it took him 2 days to saw through his thumb. But the rest of them were relatively easy. When you stop and think, I don't know if these guys border on, tough or crazy, but he had to outdo his buddy, Mike. So after he had a heart attack and he had a double bypass surgery, he decided to do the Land Rover Challenge. This guy took it a whole different step further. Instead of doing 5 marathons through the desert, through the Sahara, he decided to do the 7x7x7. And what the 7x7x7 is 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. I didn't even know that existed. I know a lot of these things you're like, this can't be true. There are some extremely tough people out there in the world, aren't there? Crazy people. It makes what we're going through kind of pale in comparison because you're like, why is this even a big deal what I'm going through? Hey, if this guy can cut off his left hand, maybe I could do something. If he could cut off his right arm, maybe I could do something. I've got one more introduction. This guy is Leonid Rogozov, and he's from Russia. He was actually on the Soviet Union's expedition to the Antarctica. He was the only medical doctor that they had hired to go on the expedition, and he was along with some other scientists and meteorologists. And after experiencing some severe abdominal pain, he realized what was happening in his body, but he was the only medical doctor there. So in 1960, on this expedition, he knew that he had to perform an emergency appendectomy. Is that how you say that word? Where you remove your appendix, and he had no one to help him. He was the only guy that knew how to do that. So he had the meteorologist hold up some mirrors, and he took the appendix out himself. It took him 2 hours to do the operation. And during the operation, he accidentally nicked an organ, so he had to quick sew that up before he could continue his procedure. 2 weeks later, acted like nothing was happening and went right back to work. did not come back home for another 9 months. And then, of course, you can anticipate the stories and the rumors and the legends that were created because of this guy's tenacity and his intestinal fortitude, pun intended. Some of you guys like that, don't you? There are other notables. There are certainly people that we can talk about all day long, people that have just really climbed the hill of adversity. And you stop and you think about what causes some people to have an enormous amount of toughness or hardness where others are more soft. Robert Schuller, who is a preacher actually from Alton, Iowa, is famous for saying, "Tough times don't last, tough people do." And I really like that attitude. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. In our world today, there seems to be a growing awareness that we need more toughness in our world. There's an atheist conservative in the political arena. His name is Adam Carolla. I don't subscribe myself to everything he thinks, but there are some fairly valuable things he has to say. And there's also some very, this is one of those sensitive subjects, faith-oriented Democrats, which I know that there are some of you in here too, and my purpose in bringing up these two extremes, both on the conservative and liberal line, Democratic and Republican line, is not to tease out any tensions politically, but just to show that on both sides of the camp, on both sides of the aisle, there are people that are recognizing a common denominator in our world that we need more toughness. And one of the biggest conversations that has really swept our country in the last year, if you've paid attention, if you've kept a pulse on our culture, is that we are raising a culture and community and people who are really soft, who are really sensitive to everything that's happening in the world. And one of the biggest debates right now is the idea of safe places. And Adam Carolla was before a subcommittee in Congress with Ben Shapiro, and this is what he says, and I'd like you to kind of tune in to what Adam says about our community. Go ahead and roll the tape.
And I don't think we are doing the children, I mean, these are 18 and 19-year-old kids that are at these college campuses. They grew up dipped in Purell, playing soccer games where they never kept score and watching Wah Wah Wubsy. And we're asking them to be mature. We need the adults to start being the adults. Studies have shown that if you take people and you put them in a zero-gravity environment, like astronauts, they lose muscle mass, they lose bone density. We're taking these kids in the name of protection, we're putting them in a zero-gravity environment, and they're losing muscle mass and bone density. They need to live in a world that has gravity. When you need to expose your children to germs and dirt in the environment to build up their immune system. Our plan is put them in a bubble, keep them away from everything, and somehow they'll come out stronger when they emerge from the bubble. Well, that's not happening. Children are the future, but we are the present, and we're the adults, and we need to act like it. And
good stuff. Now, you just stop and think about that. This is from a conservative atheist. That's from a conservative atheist. Now, let's look at what the liberal left says, okay? This guy, he was the advisor to President Obama. He was at an interview at the University of Chicago. I think you're ahead of me, Stephen, if you go back one slide, if you would. Oh, I know what your problem. Just go to black screen for now. Thank you. This guy, Van Jones, was an American political and civil rights leader. He's also a former advisor to Barack Obama. And while he was in an interview speaking about the same subject matter, safe zones on college campuses, he says this. He says, I don't want you to be safe ideologically. I don't want you to be safe emotionally. I want you to be strong. He said that 2 months before Adam Carolla said what he said at the subcommittee. There is a growing awareness that we are in a very soft culture today. Everyone is highly offended. Everyone is very sensitive. Our walls are way high, and how dare you speak truth to me? That's where we're at. That's where we find ourselves. So I believe that this series really, not only does it speak to me, because I know that there are seasons in my life where I just need to reach down and find some strength and some fortitude, but I know that for you, there's some resolve that some of us need to tap into. So, as we get started, I'd like to ask you something. When you think about tough times, when you think about tough things, what is it that really makes us tough? I think it's only adversity, and I think it's only through the fires of adversity that we're actually forged into the people that we're called to be. We need adversity. This Van Jones, the guy that I just referenced, he also went on to say in that interview, we cannot take the weights out of the weight room for people. We need resistance in our life. In other words, if we take that resistance away, we'll never be better for it. And I know many of us, we think that, why do I have to go through this fire? Why do I have to go through this trial? Why does it have to be so hard sometimes? Why do I have to deal with this difficult person? Why do I have to be in this marriage? Why do I have to put up with that kid? Why can't they just leave for high school? I get that. Just kidding, Madison. We think we want a world where we have no resistance. But the thing that we want, we actually value, which we learned 3 or 4 months ago in a sermon. See, the catalyst of toughness is when we're actually out of our comfort zone. For us to really find any sort of adversity, we have to be pushed to the limits. We have to know where the perimeters are. We have to know what our measurements and what our limits are. And that's what this entire series is. So if you don't mind, turn your Bibles to Numbers chapter 13. And as we go through this series in the next 4 weeks, I'd like you to keep one verse in mind. This one verse, Paul wrote, and he said, when you've done everything under your power to stand, stand firm then. And it's that attitude, it's that perspective that I can take more, that I can do more, that when I think I can't, I can. And you're going to find through this story of Joshua, as we walk through his life, we're going to find some examples and even definitions of what toughness really looks like. So as we get to Numbers chapter 13, there's something, I just got to do a little homework. We got to do a little context for what we're reading right now. So here's where we're at in the storyline. We all know about Moses. We know that he led the people out of Egypt. We know that he said to Pharaoh, let my people go. And now, as they enter the door, as they enter the threshold of the promised land, God has told Moses, there's the land, go take it. And that's where we're at in the story. And they arrive at this interesting place that they call Kadesh Barnea. Now, one of the things that as we're reading Numbers, I cannot afford to miss if we're talking about this. Just a little teaching moment here. When you read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, sometimes you feel like you're reading the same thing over and over and over again, and that's on purpose. Because as you're reading Numbers, you need to read it from the perspective that these events are happening as they're being written. So Moses is literally writing a dialogue, writing it down for future generations, that this is what we were experiencing. And when we move into Deuteronomy, it's after the 40 years of wandering. It's after the trial. It's after a generation has gone beyond. And now he's speaking to a new generation, and it's almost like his last words. And so sometimes as you read Deuteronomy, you can compare it to what's happening in Numbers. But as we're reading Numbers, these are the events as they're unfolding. So with all that being said, they're at this major place, Kadesh Barnea. And Kadesh Barnea literally means holy wandering. That's where they're at. There's a lot of rich detail in poetic detail in what's happening in their storyline. Now, before we get into Joshua, I just want to make sure that I share this up front. When you think about Joshua, what probably comes to your mind is what comes to my mind if you were raised in the church at all. You think of Joshua chapter 1, verse 8 and 9. Sometimes you might even have a bracelet on it, and it says, be strong and courageous, Joshua. Be strong and courageous, Joshua. Fear the Lord. Be strong and courageous. We know that verse. We've heard that verse. But Joshua doesn't come on the scene right after Moses. Actually, Joshua, as a young man, is taken as an apprentice by the man we know as Moses. And shortly after the Red Sea event, 40 years before he is the conqueror, before he is the militant leader, they actually come out of the Red Sea. Moses throws his staff in that sea, and the sea divides, and they walk across. Everyone's singing. Everyone's happy. Wow, that was awesome. If God can do that, now he can do anything he wants. We're all in. And it doesn't take the people of Israel very long to really kind of backpedal on their song. They decide, you know what? We're kind of thirsty out here. We're kind of hungry. Did God just bring us out to the desert to die? Well, we should just go back to Egypt. It doesn't take the people very long to grumble and complain. And if you're in leadership at all, you know that lesson. You know that people will complain. People will grumble. So shortly after that event, it says, not only do things get bad, but things go from bad to worse in a hurry, because now the Amalekites have attacked the Israelites. And it's the first real opposition Israel has faced outside of just the physical food, water, shelter concept. And it says that Moses appoints Joshua, and he says, I want you to go to battle, Joshua, and go fight the Amalekites. And this is a story where Hur and Aaron, they raise Moses' arms up, and when they raise his arms up, what happens to the Israelite people? They're winning. As soon as Moses gets tired and he throws his arms down, they lose. The guy engaged in that battle, i.e. the Amalekites, is Joshua. So fast forward about a year, we've received the 10 Commandments, and now God says to Moses, go take the country. We're on the threshold. It's time. So we're in chapter 13, verse 26. They came back to Moses. This is the 12 spies were sent out. And let's just go back and look at verse 3, chapter 13. So the Lord commands Moses, send them out from the desert of Paran. All of them were leaders in the Israelites. These are their names. From the tribe of Reuben, we have Shema. From the tribe of Simeon, we have Shaphat. Then we have Caleb. From the tribe of Judah, Egil. From the tribe of Issachar. And it goes on down, and you'll see an interesting note here, verse 8. From the tribe of Ephraim. This is one of Joseph's sons. From the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, send him. When you go back and you look at the Numbers, chapter 1 or 2, and you see the census that takes place, every tribe has 5 digits in them. Fighting men that have at least 20, 30, sometimes 40, 50,000 men in each tribe. Why would Moses have chosen Hoshea? Go down to verse 16. These are the names of the men Moses sent out to explore the land. And we know about the 12 spies that went out. 10 were bad and 2 were good. We know that nursery rhyme song. But look at what the parenthetical note at verse 16 says. Moses gave Hoshea, son of Nun, the name Joshua. So let's continue our story. So they come back, verse 26, to Moses and Aaron, the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. And if you can imagine being Israel, they've been wandering for a year. God has said, I'm going to give you this land. I'm going to finally deliver on my promise. They're excited. They anticipate, and they cannot wait for the 12 that come back. And here's the report. There they reported to everyone, to the whole assembly. They showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses the account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does really flow with milk and honey. Now, just some of us are too literal. When we read that passage, we think Israel had milk flowing in its rivers, had honey. What's that all about? This is about cows and crops. That's what this is about. It's meaning that the land was good enough that it could actually sustain cattle, it could sustain sheep, it could sustain goats. It produced milk. It also produced crops, because where there are bees, there is pollination. And where there is pollination, there is vegetation. And where there is vegetation, there's crop. We know that. We're an agrarian community. Some of us are. So we understand that this is not literal as much as it is figurative. So when they came back and they said, listen, this has everything that we wanted. This has everything that we wanted. We're right in the prime real estate land. It does flow with milk and honey. But these people who live there, man, they are powerful. Their cities are fortified. They're very large. And look at what happens in verse 28. We even saw descendants of Anak there. Oh, by the way, you see the phrase? The Amalekites are also there. These are the people that kind of bothered us about a year ago. These are the people that Joshua fought against. That Joshua might feel like he has a score to settle. So the Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites, they live in the hill country, and the Canaanites, they live near the sea and along the Jordan. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses, and he said, we should go up and take possession of that land. We certainly can do it. You might need to hear this phrase. We can do it. Some of you are facing an impossible, insurmountable mountain to climb. You're looking at the next chapter of your life. You're looking at the season that you're in, and you're going, I can't. I want you to say, I can. I want you to say, I can. But we have to understand how we can. We're going to come to that in a second. Then Caleb silenced the people. We should go up. We could take possession of the land, for we certainly can do it. Verse 31. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people that we saw, they are of great size. Now, it's easy to do because I did it even in this section. But I want you to go back to verse 28, and I want you to look at the very first word in verse 28. In some of your Bibles, it's a very easy word to miss. But it's the very first time the Hebrew word ever appears. And it's the word but. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the word but is the first time it's ever found in Numbers 13, because there are a lot of those words, those conjoining words in the Bible. But this is the first Hebrew word that sometimes is translated nevertheless, sometimes it's translated but. And here's what it means. It's an exclamation point. It is saying no. It is saying, we know that everything God said is there. We understand that what God said is true, but. And as we think about this word, I know that some of you, you're saying but to God. God has said, go do this thing. I want you to not give up where I have showed up. And some of you are saying, God, but I can't. This is a significant word and only appears in the Hebrew Bible about 14 times. But, verse 31, the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there were of great size. We saw even the Nephilim there, or Nephilim. And the descendants of Anak came from the Nephilim. And then it says this is their perspective. We seemed like grasshoppers to them, and we even seemed like grasshoppers to us. Sometimes the way that we're looking at a situation is what's paralyzing us the most. And it's not until we actually enter foreign territory that God's going to show us what our true limits are. Some of you are going through a season that you have no idea which way's up. You can't find north to save your life. And it's in those moments that God is leaning in and saying, I know you can't, but I can. Do you trust me to take your hand through this valley? Do you trust me to take your hand to walk this hill? And it's only when we surrender to the sovereignty of Christ and we take his hand and we say, yes, I'm in, that we really can experience what it means to be tough. Because your fortitude is not about you. When you go back to let's go to chapter 14. Let's look at verse 5. Moses and Aaron falls face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly. They gathered there, and Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, who were among those who had explored the land, they tear their clothes and they say to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us to that land, a land that does flow with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Do not be afraid of the people in the land, because we will swallow them up. And look at what they say. Their protection is gone. The Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. A couple of commentary notes that I need to make sure I say. When we looked at verse 16, there's something significant there. The reason Moses changes Hoshea's name is because the word Hosea literally means salvation. When Hosea was born, his mom and dad, his name's Nun, says, I'm tired of being called Nun my whole life. It's time to name my son something a little better. So he calls him salvation. When you look at the words Hosea, it literally means salvation. And Moses goes, not good enough. Your name is not just salvation, because when you think that your name's salvation, when you think you are the source of your salvation, you will fall flat on your face every single time. So he changes his name to Joshua, which literally means the Lord is my salvation. And that's what Joshua and Caleb had remembered when the others had forgotten. That this isn't about our power. This isn't about my strength. This is about his strength. This is about that in my weakness, I'm actually stronger. Not when I'm stronger, am I stronger? It's when I can't, that I can. Because that's when God shows up in my life. And I know some of you are at the point of fatigue, and you're at the point of throwing in the white towel. You're at the point of just saying, I can't anymore, I can't anymore. The giants are too big. The hill country's too tough. I cannot go into unfamiliar territory. And you're right. Under your own strength, you cannot. But it's not until you realize it's only under the strength of God that you can do something that you think you can't do yourself. Let's look at verse 29. Remember how I mentioned earlier the Amalekites live there? And this is kind of, for Joshua, the dinner bell rings. This is where he realizes that there's a personal vendetta to settle here. I'd like you to turn back to the first original story of Exodus chapter 17. This happens within months of them coming out of the Red Sea. I want you to see what happens at the end of the battle, where Moses is raising his arms and Aaron and Hur are lifting them up. God tells Moses something after the battle. Verse 8, Exodus 17, verse 8. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, choose some of your men, go out and fight the Amalekites tomorrow. I'm going to stand on top of the hill, and the staff of God will be in my hands. And Joshua fights the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. Now, as long as Moses held his hands up, the Israelites were winning. But when he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it underneath him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held their hands up, one on each side, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. And Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, you get a scroll and you get a pen, because we're going to write something down. Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of the Amalekites from under the heaven. Can you imagine Joshua and Caleb entering the land of Canaan and seeing these Amalekite enemies and saying, man, God has told me I can take this land. And trying to come back and convince the other 10 and convince the other community, we can do this thing, only to be met with resistance and opposition and grumbling and complaining. And how frustrating that had to have been. You see, for this journey, for this uncharted territory exploration party, some of us need to be reminded of truths that we've forgotten long ago. And so as we come to this, I want you to think about, what do I need to remember when I think I can't? Or what do I need to remind others that they think they can't? Because for me, the biggest lesson, the biggest takeaway in uncharted territory and foreign territory is this, that for us to really understand what it means to be tough, we must first remember that what is foreign to me is familiar to God. What is foreign to me is familiar to God. God will never bring me through or bring me to something he has never experienced. And some of you think there's no way that's true. What are you talking about, Steve? Some of you are going through or are on the verge of separation or on the verge of divorce or on the verge of loss or on the verge of anxiety, on the verge of stress. I want you to think about our relationship or God's relationship with his people. How many people in God's family divorce him on a regular basis? How many people in God's family separate from the power and the truth and the promise that he has provided? You see, he's gone through everything that we can fathom. And when you find yourself in foreign territory, you have to remember that that's familiar territory to God. God sent the spies ahead. God's the one that said, I need you to see what I see, so that you're aware and you're not surprised by what you're going to be facing. Sometimes our circumstances, they really seem like strange territory. And the reason is because we've never been there before. But it's in those moments that we can remember that God has. He's gone through divorce. He's gone through separation. He's gone through anxiety. He's gone through all kinds of stress in relationships, wouldn't you say? I know I cause him stress in relationship every day. It's only by the grace of God that I'm actually to be who I am. So he gets the struggle that we might find ourselves in. Another thing for us is just application. So what's this mean? And it's pretty simple. Our courage is connected to our confidence. Where we find courage is what we find confidence in. If you're confident in yourself, then your courage will be limited by yourself. If you're confident in God, then that ceiling is higher than yourself. But there's an intimate, interwoven relationship between our courage and our confidence. So let me ask you, how courageous are you, church? Have you placed your confidence in the right thing or in the right person? Maybe for some of you, it's in finances, it's in relationships, maybe even in a church or in a pastor or in a man or a woman or a husband and a wife. That confidence will have a cap. Your confidence in God has no bounds. Our courage is limited by our confidence. Do you remember what Caleb said? He said, their protection is gone. The Lord is with us. In chapter 14:9. I know some of you don't feel like that God's with you. He is with you. He is present with you. And if you place your confidence in him, if you place your confidence in him, then you'll be courageous. And that's when you learn to be tough. It's not under your own strength. But ultimately, the last application I have for all of us, and for me, it's scary how our decisions will ultimately affect our descendants, isn't it? You realize this decision to not go to battle, this decision to not charge the hill happened overnight. It happened overnight. And it affected 40 years of people. Some of you are on the verge of decision. And in order to make the right decision, be thinking forward, not immediate. Be thinking about your children, your grandchildren, your legacies. This church is all about building family legacies rooted in God's word. And that's how we'll make the right decision. And that's how we'll learn to be tough. Lord, I pray right now that if there's someone here that needs just some encouragement, they need a little help making an eternal decision, one that will solidify them in the future, that you would give them confidence and courage. In Christ's name, amen. Well,